The chassis and interior have been finished in the last couple of videos and the body is already painted. There were still a couple of final details that needed to be done to the body before I could start the final assembly, like for instance the window trim that needed to be painted matte black. So I just quickly masked it off, carefully cut it out, and then painted it matte black with some zero paints through the airbrush. The Tamiya kit comes supplied with some of the window masks that are pre-cut for the inside of the windows, so you can paint the black outline easier and don't have to make masks yourself. A little trick I picked up from my fellow YouTuber friend Plasmo is to peel off the masking halfway, then cut off the backing so you have something to grab onto with your fingers without it sticking to your fingers, and then can easily place the masking onto the window and position it a lot better. I moved on to masking off the outside of the windows as well after I finished off masking all of the inside, then took out some Tamiya semi-gloss black, thinned it a bit for the airbrush, and then sprayed it on in a couple of layers. I noticed when looking at some reference material that the side windows on the rear were tinted slightly and the rear window itself was not, so I carefully removed the masking on those and applied a couple layers of Tamiya clear smoke to give them a bit of a tint. The headlights come plated in a sort of semi-gloss chrome on the factory from Tamiya, which looks really good, though it does need a bit of extra detailing with some flat black. Before gluing the windows in place, I decided to glue on the wipers, as the cowl is now a lot more accessible than it would be after gluing it in place, as the hood is partially over it. So it's a lot easier to do it right now, and I figured while I was at it to do the rear one as well. And since I was gluing stuff on anyway, I figured I'd do the rear view mirror too. Once those parts were on and dried up a bit, I could carefully start placing the clear part into the body, and once it's finally in place, I added a couple of drops of glue on a couple of the corners with a toothpick, just a little bit to hold it in place, which is good enough. The taillight lenses were painted with a clear red and the inside was left clear, and then I could just glue those in as well and add the silver backing to it from the kit. In the Tamiya kit there is a small sheet of mesh, which is a black plastic, and on this car it needed to be a silver. So instead of just using that plastic mesh, I decided to go with Scale Production actual metal mesh. It's their fine version. I just cut out a couple of the squares that I needed and then glued it along the edges. The reflectors in the front bumper have a different shape from the stock version, so I tried fitting the stock ones in, but in the aftermarket bumper that's on this car, it is a lot more squared off, so I took out some sanding sticks and adjusted all the sides and edges until it fit perfectly in. Once the glue on the mesh had set, I carefully started masking off around it, as the stripes that were painted on the bonnet and also on the front bumper needed to go through on this mesh as well. Now the reason I decided to paint it on the body is now it's fully in place and it doesn't move, and I can easily just mask it off and line up the stripes. If I would have lined up the stripes before and then glued it in after, I could have run the risk of having it crooked, and that's not really what I'm after, so I'd rather be safe than sorry and just glue it in place, paint it in place, and just have a bit more masking to do, which isn't a big deal. The wheels need to have a chrome outer lip and a silver center, so I painted them in a gloss black, clear coated it with 2K clear, let that dry for a couple of days, and then started misting on some chrome from Zero Paints and letting that cure for a couple of hours before masking it off again to paint the centers later on. On the inside there were a couple of more details that needs to be added from the USCP kit. There were also some gauges for on the A-pillars and also some gauge decals, so those were stuck in place too. I could then move on to gluing on the chassis and interior together and then just put that all together in the body. With all of the major parts now assembled all together, I could move on to adding the final details on the exterior. The chrome on the lip now had a couple of hours to dry, so I could start carefully masking that off with some Tamiya masking tape in order to paint that center in the silver. After putting the tires onto the wheels, I could move on to gluing those in place as well. One final thing to paint is the inside of the exhaust tip. That is now all silver, and I just usually paint that with a black to hide that it's not really actually going anywhere. Something that wasn't included in the USCP trans kit, or of course in the stock kit from Tamiya, was that loop that is in front of the intercooler in the front bumper. Now, I'm pretty sure this has something to do with the NOS system. I'm not exactly sure what it is or what it's called, but I know it's supposed to be there on the movie car, so I replicated that by just bending a piece of metal rod. I have links in the description and also a lot of other materials linked there, so feel free to check that out. There's also a small piece on which it's standing, so I took out one of those pieces that is used for mounting the wheels, which I didn't use as I just glued them in place, and then just shaped it a bit, shortened it a bit, and glued it all together. And there you have it, another fantastic build. I really enjoyed it. It was a really nice challenge to paint all the stripes, and even the two-tone on the wheels was quite cool to do. I've never done that before in this kind of a look with the chrome and the silver, and I really like the way that it came out. I hope you guys enjoyed the video series, and I will see you on the next one.